Okay. Nice to have you here. My name is Jana Ticha, and I was asked to prepare for you a talk on the theme of iconic buildings. Actually, as I was told, that was the theme you have, the theme of your tour you are doing today, and probably, and so far you have not seen any iconic building here in Karlin, but later on you will visit the dancing building, which in my view is actually the only really iconic building of Prague. I hope I will explain in the next few minutes why I think that the dancing building is actually the only in Prague which can be labeled as iconic. So, how did the term originate actually? Iconic building, what's that? Iconic building. It was Charles Jenks, the architecture theorist and historian, architecture critic, who coined the term iconic building and who published a book entitled The Iconic Building in London in 2005. So you see, it's a pretty new term in architectural theory, and it's very much bound with the period atmosphere of that digital turn, of the turn of the millennium, of the marketing strategies of branding, of public relations. So today we talk about iconic buildings, iconic design, even iconic handbags, iconic whatever. Simply, iconic might be anything. Well, to me, it seems a little bit strange sometimes, and I'm a bit reluctant to speak about iconic as theoretical, really theoretical notion, because perhaps it's not so high a level of theory that is in play here in this case. I think that the use of the term iconic really is rather connected with marketing, with public relation, and with all those strategies, and that it is really much more about promotion than about critical thinking. That's first thing, which is, I think, perhaps a theme for our next debate. So, is iconic really a term which can be useful for architectural theory, for architectural thinking, and for urban planning as such? Or is it just a label given to goods? That's another important point. A building, an architecture, a piece of architecture becomes kind of goods if seen and perceived in such way as iconic something. It starts to equal the iconic handbag. So anyway, perhaps this all had Charles Jenks on his mind when he was writing his book, because to be correct, it should be said that Jenks really states in his book that the iconic building as a new genre of architecture, that's what he tries to say with his book, is closely connected to economic prosperity and to branding. So it's really, in fact, a kind of PR strategy. Sorry. So here we have two covers of that famous book. On these covers, we can see the Swiss Re building in London by Norman Foster, and on the American edition by Rizzoli, we can see a close-up of Walt Disney Concert Hall by Frank Gehry. So these two buildings have made it on the cover of this book. So they supposedly are one of those iconic buildings. And later we will see why exactly these two buildings are considered to be what Jenks calls iconic buildings. Yet one remark. Iconic is an adjective from the substantive icon. And 20 years ago, when you said icon, probably what comes on mind was icon on computer screen, icon in semiology, and also the oldest cultural meaning of this word, icon as a holy image, icon as a religious image of a holy entity, an image which is not really a representation of a sensual reality as found in the real world, but it is a representation of some spiritual entity. And I think that this very origin of the term icon is something what we should also keep in mind when speaking about iconic buildings. The subtitle of Jenks's book is Iconic Building, the Power of Enigma. So even Jenks did play with this original meaning of this word. He admits that a big part of the attractivity of the power of iconic building is the enigma, is the mystery it embodies. And now, enigma, mystery, something non-easily decipherable. That's another important part, another important property of an iconic building, another important characteristic feature of an iconic building. We will come to that later when we will look at the iconic building and their meanings. So we have said, Jenks published this book in 2005. That's when the term started to circulate. And this timing shows that the very label of iconic building is really connected closely to that economic prosperity era characterized by the advent of digital media and in terms of commerce by growth of public relations, advertising, and branding as conscious creation, conscious production of a brand, of actually a brand. What is a brand? It's an icon in its way too. An icon behind which there might be something or need not be anything. Actually, it's sometimes hard to grasp what's that. What's that special appeal of a brand? Okay, like the bag here. You know, I love those bags. You all know them. They are really good. They are practical. You can fold them. They are great. But also, it's a kind of branding because, okay, you know, it's a bag which was created by a certain company in certain time, and everybody knows that's this kind of bag. And we have many objects like this, which we use every day and which we do not think about at all. And while one important feature of the bag is its casual, practical value, for some people it might be the label and the logo. Fortunately, here not displayed so far, not yet displayed in some really offensive manner. Okay, let's go further. So what does Jenks say about an iconic building? An iconic building is created to make a splash, to make money. That's important, to make money, and the normal criteria of valuation of architecture do not apply. So what does it mean? What's being created to make money? Goods are being created to make money. So buildings in the past were created to serve some practical function, and perhaps also to create and embody meaning, to symbolize some important meaning, some shared values of the society. So how is that in case of an iconic building? Do iconic buildings embody the values of our society? Well, I'm afraid that they do to a great extent. But are those values contributing really to personal growth? Are they contributing to life? Are they contributing to health, to healthy life of society and healthy growth of society? That's another question. So we have this tricky question of branding versus representation embodied in iconic buildings. The iconic buildings have this specialty that they hardly do embody anything else than the enigma they present to the world. They hardly would be representations, built representations of some shared common values, with the exception perhaps of heated up individuality, of economical power, and such things. So what is namely typical for an iconic building is very individual, unique sculptural form, which makes strong visual appeal. So iconic buildings are kinds of celebrities among buildings, so to say. One of the first iconic buildings was certainly the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao by Frank Gehry. The work on this project started in 1992 and it was completed in 1997. Quite interesting is the entire story, how this building originated. How did this occur that in a, well, with all respect, sleepy north town in the north of Spain, such a building landed, because really landed like an extraterrestrial, like a complete alien, and created such furore about Bilbao and about the Basque country and north of Spain at the end of the 20th century. The reason was that it was the Basque regional government which promoted the joint venture with the Guggenheim Foundation, and which wanted so badly to make themselves visible on the cultural and thus also political map of the world, economical map included, namely by having a branch of Guggenheim Museum in their capital. So there is a very good account of the origin of the project given by an author named Donald McNeill in his very interesting book about global architecture and branding in architecture, whose title I cannot remember now, but certainly the author is Donald McNeill, and he's Australian. He's affiliated with the university in Sydney, and specialization is not architecture, it's social demography or social geography, but a very interesting author who has a great outreach into contemporary architecture. So if you would be interested in that, I would recommend you his writings about this issue. So he gives the account of this connection of political case of Basque independence, which was the desired aim of the local government, and this building. Quite interestingly, how did Frank Gehry arrive in the project? Because it all started as talks between the regional government, and the Guggenheim Foundation. So Thomas Krenz, the director of the Guggenheim, he knew that for his program of franchises of the museum all around the world, he needs really architects who are able to design a really statement building, something visually strong, something unique. So Frank Gehry was exactly at the moment of his career when he started to explore the possibilities of designing architecture as a means of personal expression, as a sculptural work of art, actually. And he was lucky enough to have a collaborator, an engineer whose name was Jim Glimpf, who was interested in how to employ computers and the new computer technologies into designing and producing, that's very important, producing of such irregular geometrical shapes, non-Euclidean shapes in architecture in the scale of a building. So the collaboration, the meeting of those two men at certain points of their career gave rise to a new orientation in Gehry's work, in Gehry's career, and enabled his, well, okay, let's say it, wild ideas, wild designs, wild visions, to make them reality. And what's interesting, look at this picture. That's the dancing building in Prague. You have seen it certainly many times, at least before you came here. And in the evening you will see the building for real. So now, you see the year 1992. It was the same year when this project was begun. It was an initiative of a Dutch real estate developer who came to Prague and wanted to make a statement building here. And they have asked Frank Gehry to design a building on this lot, which looks like nothing special really, just a corner of two busy streets, of an embankment, of a busy thorough street leading to a bridge over the river. But what's the point? This house belongs to the family of the former president Václav Havel. And Havel has been living there for many years. At the time of his presidency, he was no longer there, but still his brother and their family occupied this building. And it was a building simply which was built by the grandfather, by the president, and it was always Havel's family property. So, when something was to be built next to this house, of course, there was special attention given to this project. And also should be said that the place was empty since the end of the Second World War. It was in the spring of 1945, at the very end of the war, when Prague was bombed, actually by accident, by chance, by mistake. Somebody mixed up Prague and Dresden. Yes, this really happened. So Prague was fortunately not damaged too badly during the war, and at the very end, one captain did this, as we would say today, silly mistake, but if we consider what devices they had in their time at disposal, they had only maps and their own eyes, basically. So this could have happened quite easily. So one of the buildings which were destroyed during this air raid was also the building on the corner of these two streets. So since 1945, the slot was empty, and of course Václav Havel, he always, all his life, was thinking, okay, here should be built something. So all the time when he was not yet president, he was thinking about, he was amusing perhaps his mind with the, and that of his friends, with the idea of designing a house and building a house there. His idea was a house with a cultural purpose, something that would combine a nice cafe, restaurant, a library, a gallery, and of course a small theater, so really a cultural building. Well, the reality wanted it different than in the history, because the house was built as an office building for an insurance company and real estate company. But nevertheless, Václav Havel did have some word in the process of designing and building this house. You can see that here, next to Frank Gehry's name, there is another one, Slavic name probably, Vlado Milunic. That's a Czech architect of Croatian origin, who is the co-author of this building, because he has made the first sketches and first projects for this house as early as 1980s. Even wilder than Frank Gehry's visions, as you can see here. So these were the sketches of Vlado Milunic for the house, which should be on this corner. He always was imagining something very figurative, sometimes even explicitly figurative, on the place. And simply Václav Havel, as Milunic was his friend, and has been working with that plot for so long, it was his wish that he would find a way with Frank Gehry to collaborate. So it was a very special situation for such an individuality as Frank Gehry to collaborate with the local architect in terms of designing a building. But then they found a way how to work together, and the result is the dancing building, what's called dancing building today, because these two towers on the corners are said to resemble a dancing couple, like man and woman dancing, you know, complete with the many legs as they move in the dance. So dancing building was very unusual and unexpected in the mid-1990s in Prague, in the Prague cultural atmosphere. So especially architects and intellectuals really had trouble with accepting the building, with accepting this expressive, unseen shape, and they were not happy with a building with no special cultural purpose being so visible and having so outrageous form. This was one of the most important arguments, that such a singular form can be used for buildings with some wider appeal, which embodies some civic values, that buildings like town hall, theater, museum can have, let's say, strong visual appeal, can be really visible. But buildings which just serve everyday life, everyday production, like an office building, they should be more modest. That was one of the of the arguments of the very heated debate which developed here in the mid-1990s. But the lay public, as we would say, ordinary people, common people loved the building mostly, as we can see from the reactions, for instance, among visitors of exhibition of the design for the building, which was made even before the building was started, the construction was started. We can see that most lay people were excited about having something so strange here in their hometown, and after the gray days of the communist regime, most people were really very, very happy that something gay and bright is arriving in their hometown. As you see, the popular appeal of the dancing building is really great. This is one of the popular renderings on a kind of tourist postcard. Or here, this is even better. That's another postcard where the dancing building hovers over the Prague castle as the symbol of our times. And what more, this postcard is a wooden postcard, and the picture is made by burning the wooden surface with a piece of, with a kind of metal pencil. So that's even a very strange and very, very time-consuming like do-it-yourself technology, which was used for producing this postcard. Or here, Lonely Planet Guidebook edition of 2005, which sported on its cover a close-up of the dancing building and had a special section on architecture included. So you see that the building really became kind of symbol of contemporary Prague, or symbol of new Prague. So in terms of iconicity, if understood as a tool of branding, the dancing building has certainly succeeded. It can be labeled as an iconic building, even when it's perhaps not really a landmark in terms of a building which would be standing on some highly visible place, like on a hill or something really creating the skyline of the city, which is one of those features of iconic buildings which very often are associated with iconic buildings. That an iconic building changes the image of the city. So now shortly about other buildings by equally famous architects. Jean Nouvel was the second world famous architect, the second starchitect to be invited to Prague, and his task was to design again an office building, offices and commerce at a busy crossroad in the former industrial neighborhood of Smíchov. Here we are in Karlin, which was a former industrial hub of Prague, and in the south, or here we are to the north of the center of the city, and at the opposite side in the south, there is the quarter or the neighborhood called Smíchov, which also was one of which was another traditional industrial neighborhood in the city, with the first industries being established there at the verge of 18th and 19th centuries. So with the advent of post-industrial age, these neighborhoods are being rebuilt, are being revitalized, given new life. And Jean Nouvel's project was part of this rebuilding of Smíchov. It's very hard to photograph this building, actually, because it's all of glass. That's the usual problem with a big portion of contemporary architecture. When you really want to make a photograph of it, you hardly would grasp anything because it's simply so changing. But I hope I will be able to explain that the building has on its glass facade inscriptions in red letters, which are quotations, excerpts from poems written by different authors about Prague, or even from prose. Simply there are quotes by Guillaume Apollinaire or Franz Kafka, of course, and some Czech poets connected somehow to Prague. So it's a very poetical moment that you have those lines of poetry written on the surface of a building. And when waiting for your tram, you can read those poetical lines on the building. Here, the front view of the corner, where you can see those red lines, and in the background, a human figure. A figure of an angel. The entire, I have not said that this neighborhood was traditionally called the Golden Angel, because before on this very corner was a house that was called At the Golden Angel, complete with a pub, eponymous pub, Golden Angel. So everybody knows this place as the Angel. So it was obvious when Nouvel was trying to find some clue to his design, he was thinking about the idea of an angel, of creating an angel for Prague. And after really a quest for a special angel for a contemporary city, for a city which is like waking up to a new life, he has found this contemporary angel in the film by Wim Wenders, Far Away So Close is the English title. In German it's Himmel über Berlin, and I don't know how is it in the other languages. You might have seen this film. It's a very poetic film about two angels taking care of people in contemporary Berlin, to put it very, very, very quickly, very simply. And one of those angels is impersonated by the German actor Bruno Ganz, and so this personality, this angel, performed by Bruno Ganz in the movie, was used for depiction of an angel on the facade. If you would be interested what technology was used for creation of those huge images, there is another image of Prague skyline on this facade, and the inscriptions. It's quite an interesting story, because no one had really experience with images on glass facade of a building at that time, in mid-1990s. So the Czech company, which was chosen to produce the facade, company Cyprel, had collaborated with another company which produces those graphic foils. Actually, it was using a product by the 3M, this worldwide global company, which is producing those foils which are being used for advertising, for instance, on trams or subway trains, simply on transport vehicles. So the trick is that you can see the image from the outside, but from inside people can see outside. So the image is divided into little dots, which like glue together in one direction, and in the other direction allow to see through. So this is the technology which was used for those big format images on this facade. And here, is that a local building or not? That's the question. The shape looks, well, quite sculptural. there is this image, there are those inscriptions, but still, is this really something what can be called iconic? Well, I think it cannot, even when photographed from this point of view and not from this one, for instance. And I think the reason is exactly that it renders itself not easily to the lens of the camera. That it's in the very nature of this building, with its transparent facade, that it does not make this strong statement, does not say like, here I am and I won't move, I'm here standing firmly. That this building is something changeable, not so clear and strong presence, something what appears and disappears and changes with time, with weather, with light. So perhaps this is why this building did not really become so famous like Gary's dancing building, and is not perceived as anything so typical for Prague, even when it has even the skyline of Prague on its facade and quotations from literature connected to Prague and everything. Here, yet another view of another part of the building, again complete with quotations. And in Prague we have another architect working, Richard Meyer, who was asked to design, well, let's call it skyscraper, even when it's not too high, in a business district or an originating business district to the south from the city center. And now, would you tell which one is it from all those three? Which one is the one designed by Meyer? Well, it's this one in the middle. But if you have a building which might be very sophisticated, which might be very fine in its appearance, as the rule goes with Meyer's buildings, they usually have very nice proportions even at that size. They are really elegant, they have certain charm, but they never are, I would say, so ostentatious that they would become icons. An icon must be really clearly discernible, must be visible, must really make a statement in the city. Like, for instance, Torre Akbar by Jean Nouvel in Barcelona. That's a typical example of an iconic building, which really had changed the skyline thoroughly, substantially. Not only with its shape, but also with the colors in the night. Or here, yet another example, the Burj Dubai Hotel in Dubai, Burj Al Arab. What's interesting here? Why do I have this building here? This building which is being nicknamed Sail Ship. Because until now, we've been talking about buildings by famous architects, by individual authors, by star architects. And here, who's the author? Atkins, Middle East. Well, of course, the building has an author. There was a design architect to this building who, after having finished this building, had left the company and established his own. His name is Tom Waterman. But anyway, he was working with his colleagues for a huge global company, which is able to do anything from planning over design to engineering and construction. And you hardly anywhere really find in some resources the name of the architect of this building. But nevertheless, The building is considered to be an architectural icon and to be really a symbol not only of Dubai but of Persian Gulf as such. So perhaps the individuality of the author is not a necessary condition for an iconic building. But it's still better when there is the author and his personal story. Like in the case of Frank Gehry, who's a very typical example of such architect. And here we can see his concert hall, Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles. Again, started in the early 90s and finished only in 2003. So we really can say that Frank Gehry and his approach, highly personal approach to architecture, which he developed in his late 50s or in his 60s, really became kind of trademark architecture of the 1990s, of that overheated period of economy which seemed to have no limits, to stretch to simply to eternity, that the economical growth will continue forever, and that simply everybody will be only happy from now on. So that was the general atmosphere of the 1990s, I think, not only here in our country where we have experienced this transition from communism, which of course was the main story of our lives then. But very soon this economical wonder came to a halt, and I think that the concept of iconic buildings is also showing to be another bubble, actually. Another virtual reality concocted by PR agencies and by promotion specialists, spin doctors of contemporary architecture, to put it simply. And one more thing which I would like to conclude with. Why iconic buildings are kind of bubble, or why the term is really kind of a bubble, which does hardly have any real substance and any real social and anthropological meaning. It's exactly because it lacks the connection to some shared social values. I'm concluding with this image. The dancing building, and here, which is standing on a square named by Alois Jirásek, an important Czech writer, author of the 19th century, author of many historical novels, one of those intellectuals who really have formed, let's say, the cultural consciousness of the Czech nation substantially. So Alois Jirásek, as you can imagine, is the man sitting here on this, depicted by this monument. So now, what's the monument of today? What are the shared values of contemporary society? So this is, I think, a question which is perfectly legitimate to ask in connection with the iconic buildings. So what values do iconic buildings represent, if any? And are they something more substantial, or are they really just a mire in the skies, in the skyline of contemporary cities? So that's perhaps all from my part, and I don't know if we have some time left, if we can talk about it further, or how do you wish, or if you wish to have some coffee, we can talk over coffee perhaps too. Okay, thanks.
We have 10 or 15 minutes, so if you would like to ask something or make any comments or take another coffee, so you could spend here 10 or 15 minutes.
I want to ask something because the neighborhood of this building is generally some kind of neoclassic apartments or something like that.
Next to the building?
The neighborhood.
The neighborhood, well, the neighborhood is mixed, but it's a residential neighborhood. It's true there are apartments mostly, but also quite a lot of office buildings. You know, very often such buildings have also been turned into office buildings. So I would say it's mixed, but it still has a very big proportion of dwelling. Yeah.
But at least two neighbors are neoclassics.
Yes.
Yeah, from this side and from
Yeah,
this side.
yeah.
And I think, yes, Frank Gehry is a very big architect. He has his own style, blah, blah. But this building is so nice shaped, but I think it doesn't fit here.
Well, of course, yeah, that's a question.
It's higher, it is so differently shaped, and it has problems with the proportion of the road because it is a little bit in this.
Top floor is in the middle of the road.
I think it doesn't fit here.
The top floor.
Well, yes, please.
They have discussions about this also.
Of course.
If they could make the building in a smaller scale, maybe it could fit.
I will tell you how this was. This was an interesting point. The building really is a bit higher than the neighboring buildings, and also it does step out a bit from the block. All this is so because simply to be economically viable, as it was said, there was the need for more floors to be rented out and bigger floors area. So that is how it, and in the 1990s everything was possible. Any exception was much easier than today, and and especially with such a project, prominent project. So this is actually how the two towers, which are like stepping out of the urban block, how they originated, and also if you look at those windows, how they jump, that is exactly made so to disguise that there are 7 floors instead of 5 in the neighboring buildings. So it's actually not so much higher if you look at the other building which is next to it. Well, here. You see it's not so much higher from the embankment, but still they needed to accommodate 7 floors instead of 5. That's it.
I think you made a great talk working on this iconic term. Then I would ask you, what would you say is the difference to flagship architecture?
What is different?
Iconic architecture to flagship architecture.
Well, that's an interesting question. I think it's basically perhaps the same, or more or less the same. I think that that semantically the two terms are overlapping really a lot. To me, this would be more or less the same. Even I would think the difference would be in the point of view that iconic architecture is rather, flagship architecture is really something like, well, I don't think there is any difference. In fact, do you think there is any?
Well, the background of my question is we just started a research project by 3 universities in Germany, and the title of the research project, which is funded by the German Research Foundation, is Stop Architecture and its role for repositioning small and medium-sized cities. And it looks at 3 examples, that is the Feno by Sahadid in Wolfsburg. It looks at John Nouvel's Congress Center in Lucerne, and it looks at the Art Museum in Graz by Cook. And for a long time we were, of course, having a long list before submitting this proposal, a long list, and working on the difference between iconic and flagship. Because, I mean, the prime flagship architecture is, of course, the Guggenheim by Gehry. But of course, as you showed us, it is also an iconic building, so there is, of course, an overlap. But the main purpose of the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao is not to be an iconic building, it is to change around the image of the city, to reposition coming from the old industrial times into a new time, which we don't know what it is. But this should be the starting point. So the flagship architecture, as we define it, is something that has, of course, a social value, because it's about culture and tourism purposes, which serve a wider constituency. And their purpose is basically to reposition. Whether it really works or not, that is exactly the question we try to find out in our research project. And the approach that we developed is like an approach that uses a kind of a value chain situation, where we go back at the very beginning when the idea was coined by some people, officials, private people, where we need a star architect to turn around the city. Yeah? And then we follow all these ideas, the intrinsic logic of the time in this particular city towards a competition, and then who won, and how does this a building or this design being commissioned to be implemented, and the day it's put to use, and then at least 10 years of use, how it's been appropriated by the users themselves. So that is the time span that we cover. It's at least 20, 25 years, and to finally find out what kind of impacts, economic, social, in terms of urban design, in terms of innovation, building technologies, and so on and so forth. So that is a bit the difference. Of course, there is an overlap, but as you said, greatly, I think the iconic building itself does not have this purpose, like this has nothing to do with changing around the position of Dubai. It's just one piece to foster, to fortify this situation.
Yeah, that's a very good point about that orientation towards the future, towards future prosperity of a city. You're true that you're right that even the word itself and the way how we use the words and which contents, which meaning the words do have impacts the reality we describe with the words. And yeah. Flagship, it means something what shows into the future, what is directed into the future. But yeah, that's a good point. It reminded me of urban acupuncture, the theory of Manuel de Sela Morales, saying that in contemporary world we hardly can really make big interventions in cities, and that it's a viable method to make an intervention in a specific place, which then would generate changes around, and perhaps a flagship building can do that. But as in the case of Bilbao Museum, as I have read these statistics, shortly after it was opened, it really did increase the economical situation of the region immensely. Everybody was going to Bilbao, everybody was traveling there, spending there some nights, eating there, spending their money. But then came the 11th of September. People were perhaps a bit reluctant to fly, some of them. Also, there was this financial crisis then. People did not have so much spare money. And today, simply everybody has been to Bilbao once, and that's it. And people do not return, and this economical wonder did not continue. What looked at the very beginning like really a kind of miracle that that really the whole region will benefit from the museum, now it looks that it's not really the case, that the museum helped the region and the city, but the big boom of the end of 90s was probably a unique situation. So it's really a tricky question, and in our world, which is so volatile, it's really hard to predict anything. It's really difficult to say what will work.
Yeah, that's why we use a more broader and integrated approach, methodological approach to find out what different impacts does it have. And if you look at the sheer numbers only of entries, for example, people buying a ticket to go to the museums or overnight stays, then of course you have exactly this high peak in the beginning, and then you have a gradually decaying function. But of course, the more these function decays, in the best of cases, the more secondary and tertiary effects increase, like the change of the economic small-scale structure around Bilbao, Guggenheim Museum. You have all kinds of secondary effects, because you have cultural programs, art galleries, educational programs, small-scale workshops open up. So you have, of course, in best of cases, a transformation on a small scale, which does not amount finally to the same economic magnitude maybe before with shipbuilding. So of course you have something that contributes to a change or a transformation, which only can be assessed over a period maybe of 50 years, how it really contributes. Well, I'm personally very skeptical to the Bilbao effect itself.
Yeah, I think,
That's why we developed a methodology now that looks at all kinds of social processes themselves, because finally the building might even disappear, but people have become proud of being somebody again.
Exactly. The point is not the import of cultural values and visitors, but the level of local culture and local economy which gets up in consequence. So that's what's so important, that what probably happened in Bilbao and what probably can happen with such projects, that it simply will help to help the local entrepreneurial culture and local culture education and whatever local creativity and cultural niveau as such. Well, I'm not, I would say, okay, I'm a fan of this building and I really love all those buildings. Who would not love them? But at the same time, I think we have to be very careful about this excitement we feel, and about the real impact on our lives and on the life of the society. That's always, that might be very often two different things.
First of all, I think since we are here and we are talking about this building, that means it's a success and it's iconic. This is for sure. And since it's on the tourist card, this is an indication when a building becomes Tourefu by coincidence became for 100 years and more an iconic building and a flagship, and it was. I think it's more a need for a mental reference. When we have all this complexity of cities need to branding, something to refer to. So this is why it's a need, it's a mental need to refer to things. However, as you were saying, this is not enough to boost an economy. It's like a publicity board on a restaurant that attracts you the first time. You go once, twice. If the food is not good, if you don't have the substance to continue, the effect will fade. So it's just a catalyzer that can boost things. And Bilbao, it was an overall urban planning approach, and the location of the building with the bridge and all of this, it was just not the building, it was not the building at 70%, but it's all the scene that was began. Unfortunately, if the economy did not work well, that's why all this, but the building did the work that has to be done. I came from the Middle East up to visit Bilbao for the first time, and you said the Basque region was not on the map, and suddenly it was. So basically, these buildings have a function. One of their functions is to be here. It's a mental reference that are needed, but it's not enough to go further on an economic level or whatever. This is in a way how I see it.
Yes, it's a tricky relationship between the unique and the everyday. Then the everydayness, that's what counts in the very end, and how to connect it to those exceptional moments that a museum or a concert hall should produce. Yeah. Many questions, yeah. Yes, please.
I'm not an architect, but I became interested lately in this idea of the feeling of wonder, right? So I'm reading this book now about, the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Do you think any of these iconic buildings will be, because they definitely make you go wow, or they do create this feeling of, you used words like strong visual presence, statement buildings. Do you think any of them will become among the wonders of the 21st?
Wonder of the world. Well, Rem Koolhaas has written something like, I don't know how exactly the quotation goes, but it's something like, we do not build pyramids. He says this in connection with contemporary utilitarian buildings in his famous essay, Junk Space. The essay is entitled Junk Space, and by junk space he exactly means all those shopping malls and office spaces with no end that stretch out throughout the globe and have no special architectural value, but have transformed, have changed the métier of an architect thoroughly, substantially. So he says, he first gives an account of all those incredible glued and sewed together temporary structures which produce such incredible sensations and make us want more and buy more. And he says, okay, we do not build pyramids. We will not leave pyramids on the earth. Well, I'm afraid that iconic buildings are our alternative to pyramid. And that's the point, what I mean by that crisis of representation, what are the values of our contemporary society which the iconic buildings embody? What do they tell about us? They might be durable. The difference from Koolhaas's junk space is that those buildings are much more durable. Junk space is from its very principle something contemporary, like this. That's the material, while an iconic building is something that should at least produce the impression of durability, of firmness, of something what's really there, what has strong presence. But if some of them will be like wonders of the world, I think the competition is too big today already. Simply, there is really a jam of wonders. So I don't think so, honestly.
So if you don't have any more questions or comments,
Let's go and see the
okay, so thank you one more time a lot, and now you could just go to ECOM or not ECOM to dancing.
Okay. Okay, so I thank you for your attention and for your insight. And have a nice trip.